audit process, and then we've got
so it's actually quite suspicious that
we have this big function.
Recommendations, I've got 4. Sorry, Nick.
That's okay.
I only wanted 1, but I've got 4. Building contingency planning and make development programs much more adaptive in nature. We are still in the infancy of truly adaptive programming. And we are as guilty as anyone in saving children. We are still learning in that space. We are trying to innovate by putting in place emergency responsiveness systems within our programs. We put the difference between traditional programs where we wait until the crisis occurs to actually respond, and where we'd like to be across all of our development programming, particularly in health, which is to activate contingency plans the moment risks are identified. Recommendation 2, and I'll be very quick, sorry. Communities must be a part of everything we do. I've got the 6 building blocks of the health systems, which I'm sure you've all come across. I think they're a helpful framework, but they're an insufficient framework. Communities are largely lacking or just implied in that framework. I think we need to have a much more sophisticated but ultimately more useful framework to understanding the role of communities in emergency preparedness, in disease surveillance, in response to outbreaks, and in community mobilization in times of emergency or at any other time indeed. And the boxes in yellow represent all the various interactions where community involvement is absolutely critical for any pillar of that health system to function adequately. Funding, huge imbalances in the global health financing landscape. Just one quick example, pneumonia, as I said, is the single largest cause of infectious mortality. Single infectious cause of mortality among under 5 children globally. It receives 3% of the global health research. Doesn't feel right. And finally, fix the broken drug markets. I'm not going to speak too much about that, but I'll just display the slide. If you have any questions about this later on, I'm very happy to kind of respond. But lots and lots to say about the lack of access to drugs and the fundamental market flaws that underpin this failure to provide essential services and respond to needs. Stop there.
Yeah, you're on 14 minutes, so.
Not too bad. Given I'm testing the waters, I mean, it's not too
12 and a half.
Yeah, that was my math, sorry.
I think it would probably be 15, so you're in time. Thank you very much, Sammy. Pretty sobering stuff there. I suspect most people in this room knew this, but I had no idea that the WHO's budget was $2 million.
That was expressed in billions, so it's 2 billion, but it's still ridiculous.
Oh, 2 billion, right, okay.
Compared with, the global
right. But yeah, that's quite something, considering where the WHO sits in terms of its role when it comes to healthcare globally. Let's pick up one, which I'm sure we will do. On to our next presentation from Jenny.
Should we show this?
Let's split. No.
Let's find out.
Was it I? Yeah. Sorry, I've got it on my notes.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I will just preface that.
It is actually Ike, but I mean.
No, it's Jenny.
No.
Yeah.
You told me it was Ike.
I know, my mistake.
Just to keep us on our toes. I will preface that I have a large speaking part that I've handed over to my African scientists in this. So that is 7 minutes. So I will try and speak briefly to give them the floor. So I am Jenny Wilson. I am the Programme Manager for the CRIC Africa Network. What is the CRIC? Because it is a very new building. It's an interdisciplinary biomedical research institute just by King's Cross. I think it's the largest and biggest investment in a biomedical research centre in Europe of recent times. And we were created in, I think the building was completed in 2015, but unsurprisingly, to populate it with both people and all the fancy toys that we have, that took until autumn 2016. Our partnership is, so we're populated, and we've got partnerships with 3 major London universities, so King's, UCL and Imperial College, and we get our money from 3 sources. So the Wellcome Trust, which is I think the UK's biggest philanthropic funder of biomedical science, Cancer Research UK, so unsurprisingly we have a lot of cancer research going on in the building, and the Medical Research Council from the UK's government. It is a major community, all under one very snazzy glass roof of 1,300 scientists, and it aims to sort of catalyse all the conversations. We have so many sofas, but it's all on the premise of scientists bumping into each other, having those spontaneous conversations that stimulate, oh, well, you're doing that, I'm doing it, what if we... so our priorities include discovery without boundaries, and particularly relevant to this programme is development of future science leaders. So it is a jazzy place to work, but our Crick African network sees this jazzy building partnered with 5 African research institutions. So we've got a fairly good geographical continental spread, with Uganda, the MRC unit, now the MRC/UBRI and LSHGM, Uganda Research Unit, the MRC unit in the Gambia, 2 universities in South Africa, the University of Cape Town and Stellenbosch University, as well as the University of Ghana through the West African Centre of Cell Biology for Infectious Pathogens, which is an African Centre of Excellence funded by the World Bank. So I'll just, oh no, it's running a surprise. What this programme does is we are trying to bridge the transition from the training side of your scientific career into independence, so that we've got more people delivering really high quality science, partly through funding their proposals. So all the science is African generated, their ideas, what do they think are the solutions. A lot of mentorship, that's a theme that we've heard that a lot of African scientists feel that they lack, is how do I get there? Show me how. And bespoke training, so if they want training on the latest jazzy toys, it's partly training that, but also how can you then contextualise it so that if they go back to Africa and they haven't got the jazziest toy, then they're still able to do really high quality science. We've awarded today 17, but I didn't have this photo. So 16 fellowships to these early career scientists. They didn't have to come from those institutes, they could come from, they had to be African. So we have some returning diaspora, we have some who've come from within those institutes, and we've had some who've come from other African institutes, and we'll be spending time in those. We have an infectious disease thematic focus, so they're all working on those, and our funding for this comes from the UK government's Global Challenges Research Fund, which has the unfortunate pitfall, as Sammy highlighted, of not long-term commitment. So from October 2017 until December 2021. I'm perhaps most excited to show you who they are. So these are our 16 scientists. We have 7 of them working on malaria. Now 7 of them working on tuberculosis. We've got 1 who's looking at HIV, 1 looking at meningococcal meningitis, and 1 looking at how can we use HIV antiretrovirals on systemic lupus erythematosus, down in the corner with Kate in the bottom left. So that's quite an interesting translational application. Just looking at 3 of them, we're going to hear from Irene, who's the lady in the top corner, Aida, who's based in Senegal, and Peter at the bottom there in the next slide, who are my spotlights. And I definitely believe in them highlighting what they think the challenges in research, getting their research into the public health domain. That's amazing, it worked. So this
Hi, my name is Dr. Peter Kwashi. I am a Crick African Network Fellow based at the University of Ghana, and also an assistant scientist here at the Francis Crick Institute.
My name is
University in Dakar, Senegal.
My name is Irene Angel Biraro. I'm an infectious disease physician working mainly with Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda. But I'm also affiliated to the MRC UBRI and the School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine Uganda Research Unit.
So my research in the past has always been on HIV research, focused on antiviral therapy and drug resistance. Currently, I'm looking at the different genetic variants of HIV within West Africa and trying to evaluate the potency and efficacy of newer antiretrovirals against these unique strains which exist in West Africa. And this is because there's a high genetic diversity in West Africa compared to the rest of Africa and the world.
My main field of research is malaria, and currently my research activities focus on malaria in the context of elimination, working in helping the National Malaria Control Program, assessing their strategies to eliminate malaria in Senegal using genomic data information.
I am going to study the magnitude of pregnancy associated with tuberculosis in Kampala. And evidence has shown that tuberculosis greatly affects the maternal and neonatal child health, and about 10% of maternal deaths in pregnancy have been attributed to tuberculosis. In addition to affecting the mother, TB also affects the unborn baby, and my research is also going to try and look at how that exposure affects the response of this unborn child to future vaccines.
So in Ghana, public treatment guidelines for HIV is based on research that has been published, mostly based on subtype B, subtype C HIV viruses. And these two subtypes form the majority of the worldwide pandemic. However, in West Africa and in Ghana specifically, they are very rare and they're not circulating within that context. And this is important from a public health perspective because we need to make sure that the drugs which are being used are highly efficacious, and currently there's a high level of virological failure and high levels of resistance, and this could be in part due to this lack of correlation between the viruses and the drugs which are being used.
After years working in the field of malaria, I realized that to address relevant research questions for disease control and elimination, researchers should collaborate closely with the control programs and design their research so they can have a public health impact.
There's also new evidence showing that in Uganda we are missing many TB cases, and one of the populations I think that we're missing the TB cases is in the pregnant mother population. So I'm hoping that my study will highlight this neglected population who are vulnerable. We hope that we will be able to inform the national stakeholders like the Ministry of Health. We hope to have strides in trying to reduce TB-related disease burden and mostly mortality among pregnant mothers in the country.
My country, Ghana, and Africa as a whole is always playing catch up and has always taken a followers role in public health research and linking public health research to policy and treatment guidelines.
For me, the biggest challenge for public health is that usually the researcher findings are not used to propose solutions to health problems, and yet researchers do not usually take into consideration the public health needs while designing their research questions.
Some of our public health programs will have increased financing for internet combinations that can help have some of these problems. Because, for example, TB is a very preventable disease, and therefore, if we can prevent TB, we can prevent TB-related deaths. And that alone can help us reduce maternal mortality by attributed to TB in this population.
What is encouraging, I think, right now is that there's a new crop of individual scientists, policy makers who have recognized that sometimes the policies that we are adopting based on WHO guidelines might not necessarily suit our unique environment, and there's a greater push now to do original research in Africa and to use this to translate into policy.
In Senegal, there is a good relationship between the research institutions and disease programs, mostly between the MCP and the universities, the research institution. And this is, I think, a great opportunity to use the research data into the real world practice.
I'm hopeful as Ugandan and African scientists that we have the opportunity to address several adjacent public health problems. And currently, we are building capacity in Ugandan scientists like myself to equip ourselves with research skills, research networks that can help us collaboratively address some of these issues. So I think the future is very bright.
I apologise for the sound there, but I hope that also transported you to Entebbe for a moment.
There was some of that fresh air.
Exactly. It's a beautiful campus if you have a chance. So, just returning to this room, the current situation, I think generally there was a hopeful message. I feel like strides are being made. Going back to Sammy's point about being responsive, it is frustrating that in response to the 14-15 Ebola crisis, there's now a new, very high containment level laboratory built in the Gambia, just in the wrong location for the DRC, but now West Africa, and they have done training exercises there for what would happen if there happened to be an outbreak, so they know how to use it. It's just now in the wrong location. There's a huge network of national reference laboratories, so things like you've got influenza, 15 national influenza laboratories across Africa, which isn't enough, but it's a good start. But equally, our colleagues at the University of Ghana have the National Reference Laboratory for Rui ulcer, and that seems to have a really good dialogue with the government into how to both register cases and also categorising them appropriately, and the shifting political willingness, which I think Peter highlighted there, that the more scientists you have coming from the community, the more politicians who have grown up in that community say, hey, I think I know a scientist, and that they're doing research that's relevant to our country. Having said that, national research funding models are largely absent bar South Africa, and if you don't go into the next point, if the financing is coming from abroad, so are the priorities, which is the most frustrating aspect. We set the theme of infectious diseases, and fortunately they felt that was a broad enough church to apply to, but it's still our priority, not necessarily generated locally, and maybe that speaks to the mental health and the non-communicable diseases. And as Peter also said, the data, things like the WHO guidelines that they're following is still coming from outside of the continent, which means that you're not necessarily addressing the issues that are there. Having said that, there is encouraging developments in the amount of training going on. You no longer have to leave the continent to get your advanced PhDs, but still the statistic that's thrown out there is they still need 1 million new science PhDs to address that. Our colleagues in Ghana had a call recently for PhDs, and they had 518 applications for 12 positions.
15 minutes.
Oh, okay, I'll go to the next one then. For trends for the future, there is increasing capacity and that is encouraging. We're seeing people who left because there weren't opportunities returning because there are now more opportunities and there is more data coming out. And political willingness, although ongoing challenges, is then that willingness turning into action. And it's one thing to make great scientists, but you also need the information services, you need all the technicians, you need the technology specialists. It's not just the big ideas, you need all that ecosystem. And the real cost, it's not fair to give them the same amount of money as you would in the UK, because just getting your reagents costs double and everything like that. So my key recommendation is that by having formal funding structures of national governments, you get to democratise the research that's going on and make it actually applicable locally. I know money is always what's asked for though, so if I couldn't have that, then I would go for better dialogue between scientists with both the public to generate the demand for research and policymakers so that they know how to take it on board.
Sorry, don't worry. Thank you very much, Jenny. One of my takeaways from that is WHO needs the correct budget, by the sound of it.
I don't want to overstep my time there. We had a really depressing statistic from our colleague from South Africa who do have their own national research funders, but they said that the CRIC alone receives more core funding than the entire South African research budget for medical research, which is a terrifying scale there.
There's a theme around funding in regions, which I'm sure is nothing new, but again, plenty to pick up on there in the discussion later on. Okay, now I believe it is.
Yes.
I missed her.
That looks like you.
Thank you. Yes. So, partly because apart from being a Nigerian public health doctor who worked here for many years and then moved back to South Nigeria Health Watch and Nigeria Free with colleagues there, I also moonlight as a writer, so I tell stories, and so this is going to be sort of my story and using that too. So that's May 2014, that's the start of Pediatric and Nigeria Health Watch. Our starting colleagues, me and my partner, Chico Henry on the left, and our first 2 employees and a volunteer who started. And if you remember, May 2014 was when Ebola also was live, and so, although it wasn't planned, that was our entry into the health space. And of course, the Ebola crisis showed how globally connected we were. It also threw into sharp relief some of the gaps, the assumptions, the attitudes, the differences in response, which I think I don't need to go through again. But what it also led to was this surge in investment in global health security, in strengthening the international health regulations, and that's part of what we're seeing now. It also led to the emergence of the Africa Center for Disease Control, set up by the African Union, driven by the experiences that African political leaders felt they were having with the World Health Organization at the time. Of course, in terms of the emergence of infectious disease, Sami has talked about increased urbanization, population growth that continues across Africa, rapid, and climate change, which will continue to drive these diseases. When Ebola started, we played a role in 3 sort of main ways. One of our very first jobs was, strangely enough, we never expected it when we were setting up a public health consulting firm, was from actually a private equity fund in the US. And it emerged that they had investments in West Africa, industries and factories and things, and so they wanted an expert local assessment week by week of how the epidemic was developing. So we did that. We also worked with Ebola alerts, which I think in some ways highlights. So Ebola alerts was basically when the first case of Ebola came to Nigeria. A group of medical students, dental students at the University of Lagos got together, and young doctors got together, bought a cheap phone, created Facebook pages, Twitter pages, websites, and basically started out asking questions. And by the time the government more or less woke up to, they just found that it was easier to incorporate them into the response rather than set up a separate media angle. And we got involved because They contacted us, so quality assured the answers that they were giving. So that was the role we played in that. And then we then went, well, some of my colleagues went to Liberia and Sierra Leone as part of the response, seconded to WHO as well. And then the African Union then put out a bid, because many people don't know this, but 2014 was the first time the African Union ever sent its own response to a public disaster in Africa. Usually they would be part of the UN or WHO, but there was the African Union response to. So we were asked to evaluate that. We won the bid to do that, and that's this was what the mission was supposed to do, and I think this is a theme that I'll keep returning to. I think Dr. Kwashi mentioned in the previous one. So sort of where we're getting to the point where we're having more African voices, more African agency in shaping some of these responses. Because certainly in the evaluation, one of the things we learned was that people felt that the African Union arrival of the delegation was a bit of a game changer, because they were able to actually sort of use some of the local experiences, for instance from Nigeria, where they had successfully contained Ebola, and apply that with Liberia, Ghana, and Sierra Leone. So this was some of the perceptions of key stakeholders and partners. The team was not perceived as pretentious from brothers and sisters. They were able to insist on the response being harmonized. Stakeholder, so that's kind of the general thing. And then I think another theme in relation to infectious disease capacity building is the involvement of the private sector. Because what we found was that Ebola, a bit like the private equity fund who got involved with us, we have people with resources who, because it touched their business, then had an incentive to think about how do we, make sure that things. So we, in Nigeria, for instance, there's various corporate organizations who are supporting some of the formal government structures now around disease control, and partly as a result of that. So this was the London Business School Africa Conference in 2014, where we convened the first health panel at the Africa Conference. Then this was last year, one of our proudest moments, we won the bid from the West Africa Health Organization to design and deliver the first ever full-scale simulation exercise in West Africa of an infectious disease outbreak, and that was in March 2018. It ran about 2 days, involved about 300 participants from all the countries of the West Africa sub-region at 14 sites, including Nigeria, the ground border, and it was all sort of done by local staff. And I remember sort of WHO and CDC saying, "Are you sure you don't want to send technical consultants?" And they saying, "No, we're fine, thank you very much." And so it was very gratifying when, at the evaluation day at the end, they all said how well it had gone. Then this is health needs technology. We're talking about technology. Another area we work on is the Health Needs Tech program, where we try to bring together the health communities and the growing tech communities in different parts of the African continent. Because our belief is that, when Jenny was talking about having lots of sofas and collaboration, that's the same thing we want to do between the health workers, frontline health workers, and the tech communities, so that we don't have solutions that tech people think are easy and nice, but actually don't have very much relevance, because that's one of the key. So as a result of that, we have been running a series of programs where we bring health workers into the tech hubs and innovation hubs in Nigeria, in Kenya, in South Africa, and we've also held hackathons there. And so that's the winning. We have a specific hackathon on infectious diseases in Abuja in 2018. We were approached by a US infectious disease foundation who wanted to run that, having heard of our work. And this was the winning thing, and it was called Sammy Band. It was a sort of fashion bracelet that had antibacterial gel in it. And that's still being developed as a business proposition. Those were the second runner-up. They came second, and she's a registrar in medicine at Lagos Teaching Hospital, and she came up with a mobile. Her colleague is a tech person, and they came up with a mobile way of notifying the Nigeria Center for Disease Control of Notifiable Diseases at the bedside. Then this again is from a conference I attended in August in Nigeria. One of the challenges people often talk about in relation to trying to use tech in Nigeria or in Africa is, well, people don't have smartphones, and so you won't be able to, you have to do it by USSD. But this study that looked at all the Lagos primary health care centers, even in the rural parts of Lagos, showed that quite a significant number have access to wireless service and smartphones. And so we're looking to work with them to develop some potential solutions around that. One of the things, obviously, that in relation to that is how do we use tech to, for instance, the pneumonia that Sam was talking about. We are beginning to look at, instead of just talking about what Africa doesn't have, are we making the best use of what we do have? So there are guidelines there that exist. Are they being used and applied consistently? And can tech be something that helps push that? Maybe having an algorithm on the phone that everyone then has to go through the same thing and can easily be audited. So we're going to be trying that out. And we also worked on a project for Public Health England on operationalizing the Memorandum of Understanding between Africa CDC and WHO Africa. I think, again, that highlights a different aspect of the current state of play, which is really around the politics behind it. So, on one hand, WHO has been there, and Africa CDC has been set up, and who is in charge, and how do you, and the Western powers have lined up in different sides of the argument. So that's the way it is. And I think it's also important to talk about the variation between countries and within countries. So it's not all universally poor. Some countries are better. Lagos State compared to some of the other states where we did the exercise, I was really impressed by how they had a good grasp of all their health facilities, even in the deepest, darkest slums of Lagos. There was someone who went there every 2 weeks to collect data to different stuff, and so they have access, which is the first step to actually building a surveillance system. In terms of people in introduction to individuals, I've got 4. They're all diaspora returnees. So that's Professor Ruko Keke. She was a professor of molecular biology at Harvard College in the US for many years. Returned to Nigeria in 2014, doing a lot on all fronts, particularly around antimicrobial resistance. But she also is editor-in-chief of the Association of African Society of Laboratory Medicine Journal. So she's basically doing everything, mentoring students. So she needs all the support she can get. This, I have to sort of give my own conflict of interest. This is my very good friend who I started Ebola with, but 18 months, 24 months after we started, he was poached by the Nigerian government to run the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, and this was from Nature. The Nature journal in February this year, they did a feature on him, highlighting some of the work he's managed to do and is doing. So that's my second. And this is the Director General of the Africa Center for Disease Control, John Kengason, talking about she put a tweet, and you see they talk about this is the new public health order one for Africa. We're so proud of the leadership. So this is a very heritage. She again she's works for Public Health England here. She's British Nigerian, public health doctor, but she's leading the Public Health England's international health regulations tracking project in 6 countries across the world: Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and Myanmar. And she's able to bring that global perspective that I think some of us diaspora people have in a way that other colleagues may not necessarily share to that level. And she's also passionate about bringing up African women in global health, because we found that there are very few. And that's John Pegason, the director of the African Center for Disease Control and Prevention, who himself moved back from the CDC in Atlanta to head that organization on behalf of the African Union. And so you have these I think that's my theme, really, about how there's a lot that's still not being done, but quite some interesting stuff that's happening. In terms of future trends, what's going to happen after the next big thing comes? IHI, global health security is hot now, and people are putting money in it. There'll be another next big thing. What happens then? How do you make the most of now? There's an incredible growth of young public health professionals, and there's a national field epidemiology training program which didn't exist before. So you now have all these young doctors, veterinarians, scientists scattered all through different African countries who have had training, surveillance, and are able to help with the outbreak investigations and delivery. How can we use technology to improve training, sharing, and building the evidence base and resilience capacity? It was interesting, you talked about improving research capacity as the title. I thought actually there's a problem there. It's not the research capacity alone, it's the response capacity, and that's a mistake. We often make thinking just research, it's actually the doing. And then, of course, recently I think there are in the last 2 weeks, two interesting things that happened. Google has brought together all its health units, including DeepMind, under one umbrella, and part of why they've done that, they say, is to focus more on global health issues, including Africa. So it'll be interesting to see what emerges from that. 2 days ago, the Rockefeller Foundation announced with UNICEF a huge data science project to make sure that frontline workers in Africa can benefit from the progress in artificial intelligence and data science that's happening. So again, we'll see where that goes. With nationalism rising across the world, how can we depend on funding? Who knows? Will the push for universal healthcare mean that the money from universal healthcare will mean more resources for general, resilience and preparedness? Don't know, but we hope it will. In terms of providing one key recommendation, I think I side a bit with Jenny. So it's really about strengthening and valuing equally diverse perspectives in the planning and delivery of interventions and initiatives, not just because of the ethics or morals, but because it creates genuine ownership of the agenda and project. That's what we've learned. If people are not honest and frank with you about where their gaps are, you can't solve the problem. And if you just come with your agenda, they'll say, oh yes, it's fine, yeah, we've got the guidelines, yes. And you go, and then it's not there, which is what happened with the IHRs. And I find when we are doing our training and workshops, I have sort of pushed very hard and said, look, you have to be completely honest. This is about what the minister wants or what your head of department wants. It's about protecting you, because the next epidemic, you will be the person in the front line. And so be honest with me. And then I think, health and technology, we need to talk to each other everywhere we can, let's bring them together. And then please make use of the diaspora professionals, the Crick Institute, Save the Children, and you're reaching out to those people. They may not be your part of your formal employee network, but they will have insights that are useful. And I'm looking forward to when discussions about the future of Africa, public health, are held in Africa and not at the Chatham House. Thank you very much.
That's one for you, Nick. On the to-do list. Thank you very much. Plenty there. Some themes that stand out, I think, is the intersection of technology and healthcare. The theme of how do we do more with what is available now? Because if you just look at the macro numbers, that will take a long time, if ever, to achieve. But also, I think, and I'm glad it came up, is where the private sector fits into this. And I don't mean that in a blinkered way of just leave it to business, but it's interesting to see the response when the bottom line is at risk. Suddenly there's a willingness and an interest to say, what do we do about healthcare? And obviously, if you can bridge that gap, there are resources that can be tapped into. Last but not least, our host.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yes. Sorry. I'm really sorry. Yeah, so this, that was the last hackathon, and people are there, and for me, it combines young people, health, technology, fun, the future.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, there's always a risk when you go last on a panel like this, where everyone might say what you want to say, and you're kind of clutching at straws, and this is where they're valuable to conversation. I think quite luckily, I read the brief and I went in a completely different direction, so thankfully I think what I'm going to say has been said, but I was touching on some of the themes of what I was going to mention. I don't have any words, and that's not because I was lazy and putting slides together, but maybe I was. Anyway, no, it's just because I think pictures tell 1,000 words. Nelson Mandela, we're familiar. He was actually, quite populist in his political ideology, and that's really the focus, I think, of my discussion, my contribution, is to go a step backwards from where we are right now, to unpack some of the assumptions and some of the concepts when we think about technology, when we think about health, when we think about the way that we conceptualise public health in Africa. Mandela himself was quite a populist ideologue, nationalist as well. And when you think about Mandela, you don't think about someone like Farage, who is also a populist and a nationalist, although that's what similarities end up. I don't need to make a comparison, but for provocation I do. And for provocation, I am going to pull out some tensions with some of the other panelists here. Which is that I feel like public health in Africa is failing because on some conceptual levels we're not making the arguments to convince the electorate that this is the right thing to do. We don't make the right arguments to convince the public this is the right thing to do, which is why vaccines are failing, which is why we go into communities for Ebola response and they reject us. Because there's the assumption that health is the right thing and you should just follow us. We talk about technology and disruptive ideas. The wave, I think, of the political spectrum and the political agenda at the moment shows that there is a complete disruption to our, political construct, in the sense that it's populism right now, it's walls and not bridges, I think naturally there's an assumption that universal health coverage, health for all, is a liberal thing, but what does its right-wing hat look like? If it has one, we again just assume that as the healthcare professionals, as the healers, we know what's best for a population, and that should happen. So that's the kind of angle I'm coming from. Actually, I think we need to go back to basics and think about the values within what we do, within healthcare. That there is a poor political dialogue within the public health arena. The relationship with the political landscape is weak. So, for example, there's a brazen assumption that WHO is the right thing to have. Who says that it is? Have we even just unpacked those assumptions and just had some really difficult conversations about, okay, in the way that humanity is going, with questioning the IMF, questioning the World Bank, questioning the UN, questioning global institutions, and questioning globalization as a whole, is the WHO the right thing that citizens in different countries want? Do we want a global identity for global health? Maybe not. And if there's this elite assumption that actually WHO is the right thing to have, one world governing body on healthcare, we may have a nasty surprise, in 5 years' time, whatever, when, as we see with the US administration right now, they're questioning the funding of the WHO, because actually those citizens that have elected their president have said that this globalization thing isn't really on their agenda. I think you get the point of what I'm trying to say. Again, some of it is for provocation, not necessarily that I believe in all of those points, but it's that there has to be a political discourse within public health that recognises where people are, as opposed to saying, we doctors, scientists are here, you must meet us here, because that's not how you stay in power, that's not how you influence. And talking about power and influence and tech, I could have put Jeff Bezos here, for example. That's what people in tech have done. They've come with their biases, they've come with their desire for power and influence. They kind of move on from one platform to the next. So Jeff Bezos buying Washington Post, the Facebook platform moved into currency, now digital currency. And the point I'm making here is the values underpinning their approach. So you may know, for example, when the Apple Watch first came out, it tracked every bodily function but women's menstruation cycles, because 90-80% of the men, or the people engineering those watches, were men. Similarly, on many digital platforms, they'll have a list of drop-down boxes, and it's all categorized alphabetically. But when you get to the gender section, it's men above women. That's because the values of the people behind the thing were, the kind of patriarch, which gives you your end products. And so I make the point to say, within everything we do in public health, we kind of throw out points about communities, financing, partnerships, without an explicit expression of what those values are. And if the public can't engage with them and see where they're coming from, then that assumption, that Hippocratic relationship we've had from centuries, may not continue to exist. There'll be a questioning, because with the increase of social media and information at everyone's fingertips, everyone is an expert, and everyone is questioning, is this real news or is this fake news? And so equally, we can't just be assumptive as public health people that we have that relationship or that place in people's hearts and minds. And a real example of someone who's politically savvy and obviously is where he is at the moment is Dr. Tedros, who experienced those kinds of things in his country before ascending to DG with the WHO. So I wish him very best of luck in his new role. Okay, so yes, I did read the brief, and the structure of that's kind of my analysis of where we are, that's my analysis of where we're going, which is that people are going to continue to assumption people with power and influence in health, in climate, in everything, which is why, again, climate is another example. I think for us, assume learned people will really clearly see the benefits of climate change, but the electorate, many citizens don't, and they're very right to question, actually, is this the right thing to do? And we're in that place in time where actually hard facts and figures about this, public health, disease or this thing won't cut anymore. We need the values to drive the discussion to capture people's hearts and minds. So this is Beveridge, the founder of the NHS, and so my spotlight is actually on the NHS of 70 years ago, which was a very entrepreneurial, politically savvy thing, which I didn't see much of across Africa in the public health discourse. I see scientists, public health clinicians, not as close to the political institutions as they could and should be. And to bring out some tension here in the panels, I think tension breeds some kind of good insight. I'll just pick on what some of my colleagues have mentioned. So, for example, Sami said about fixing the drug market. Jeremy Corbyn also said the same thing. The Labour Party leader here about doing generics. You get where Jeremy Corbyn's coming from because there's a value-based ideology behind what he says. In terms of the values of the drug market in Africa, what is it that's driving that desire to fix the drug market there? Is there a value for state ownership? Is there a desire for, what's the desire? It's not explicit, I don't think, in a lot of what we say and do, discovery without borders or without boundaries. And again, we see that there's a population of people that actually say, maybe, we want to put up boundaries, we want to focus on our country first. So again, there's a disconnect. Sorry? Yes, but then they will put up their own institutions, their own relationships to address those issues, as opposed to being imposed on them this global elite framework or platform in Geneva that says this is how etc. should run. And absolutely, you need the courage and confidence of people like yourself to make sure that solutions are native and owned locally, as opposed to top down. Just because of time, I'll kind of zip through. I think the point I was going here for was about virality and spreading stories and having a narrative. That's the way that people engage in ideas and engage in points. What's the story, what's the narrative, what's the thing that will spread and capture people's hearts and minds? We see the messages from the traditional right. It's simple, it's not complicated, you can write it back with us whether it's moral, right or wrong. It captures people's hearts and minds. So my recommendation is that we, one, become more politically savvy, and two, engage in the political game. And there's a really interesting game theory about how to engage in issues like this. There's game theory that says it's either a finite game or an infinite game. And I'll just explain quickly what that means. So you either play a game to have a defined outcome, or you can play a game just for the sake of playing. You think about people like Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and their companies aren't there just for a certain outcome. They're playing a game to have, to play, so an infinite game. They're playing, to continue playing, not just for a defined period. Equally in public health, I feel like it feels like we're in an infinite game set up as well. We're playing to play rather than to actually have a defined outcome, eradication. And maybe that's the setup that you have from donors who want to perpetuate a system that favours a particular set number of people. Anyway, I'll stop there. Some complications, some thought, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ali, for introducing some tension. Respond to any questions? Out there.
Just brief what they should be fulfilling, which is social impact. We could go through a number of failures which I've listed on that slide, but that's where we're coming from as an organisation. That's where the major inequalities lie. Of course, there's drug pricing, but there's also drug formulations which are completely inadequate for children or inadequate for very remote locations where clean water is hardly available. There's a whole range of failures within the drugs and medical equipment market, which means that pneumonia cannot be diagnosed because there's no pulse oximeters in northern Nigeria. Because if you show up in a health center in Jigawa, you're not going to get antibiotics, you're not going to get rotavirus vaccine because it's not manufactured in sufficient quantities, because there's no market incentive for it to be manufactured in enough quantities. Because there's no incentive for national manufacturers in Nigeria, in Kenya, to manufacture generics or to manufacture zinc in enough quantities for children who suffer from diarrhea or cholera and need that kind of treatment. So it's completely driven by child rights and tackling fundamental inequalities in access to basic healthcare. But that's one of the points that you raised. There were others which I'm sure will come out in the conversation.
Anybody else want to respond to any before I bring in the rest of the table? More politics, more politically savvy, hearts and minds.
Yeah, I think actually, for me, I think there are two things. One is that actually, if you are on the ground working there, you will realize that a lot of what you're talking about is actually happening. So, partly because of the way, I find, I work in public health here for many years. In Nigeria, in some ways, the community is more connected to policy and, what's happening. So that is one positive. The second is that, I think, in relation to the question of, why should we care, or, so I'm just trying to do an abstract, it is a good and moral thing. And I think actually, the poor will feed the rich, and so it's also
one day.
Yes, so so if Western countries think, we can build barriers, hordes will swarm, and it will be, chaos. It will be apocalyptic. That is happening. That's the reality of the world we're in, because people can see what is available. And they're not willing to just, my grandparents could sit in the village and think, okay, this is all there is. Young Nigerians and
okay, I think we should get some other perspectives in. Rules of engagement are very familiar. Keep it brief, quick introduction, so we can get as many contributions as possible. We'll start over there, and then we'll come to you over there.
Mine's very quick. I need to go to get a flight. I hadn't realised the format of the meeting. But I just wanted to say I'm Tamar Gosh from the Royal Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. I thought the talks were really interesting. There's so much I'd like to say. But if there were conversations that you three could pick up with the Royal Society, please let me know. And again, I'm really sorry to have to run. But thank you so much.
I hope you're going somewhere nice.
Ghana.
There you go. Have a good
Very
one.
good to send my comment.
And something to follow up on. Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm from Namibia. I'm from Commissioner. I see that I think we're only 2 missions here.
Yes, indeed.
I think it's a pity that there are not more. African missions there, and I would have loved to see more engagement with the African group on these issues, because these are issues that all of us, of course, have opinions on. First of all, I think it's fabulous that you mentioned the AU work, because that's what I was going to say, was going to highlight, because I think very often we get caught up with the WHO and that, and we forget that AU has policies on everything, from aging through to social security. The Maputo Plan of Action on...
And very good policies.
Yes, exactly, they are perfect. The problem is, the policies are not known. They sit on the shelves. For example, the Maputo Plan of Action on reproductive health. Reproductive and sexual health, and I forget another name, but the point is just that policy goes from conception to death and looks at everything. It is such an amazing document. And yet, Save the Children, I mean, you do fantastic work, but really some of your workers are so arrogant, you don't even want to talk to them. And I think that is really what you do. You raise a very, very important point, because you do get this Western mentality of people who are coming. They forget that, for example, Namibia is 3 times the size of the UK, the size of Germany and France put together. That if you take out everybody from France and Germany and you put a suburb of London into those 2 countries, that is Namibia. And Nigeria is the same in space, but with 190 million people. And that is the diversity that we're talking about. But at the same time, you have people like the nurses and so on that you see on the ground that are just awesome. And we have fantastic workers from Save the Children and other organizations. And it's just impossible to just put everybody in one basket, and say, oh well, everybody's good or everybody's bad. There are so many different levels. And one of the things I just wanted to highlight was, well, first of all, the AU aspect and how it's important that we don't ignore the AU, but we utilize what the AU has already done, what people have done through the AU. And I'm so happy that the AU is starting to stand up to be counted, because there is a lot of expertise that can be drawn in through that, and people will listen to the AU. That's why you now have the AU and SADC. You have other organizations that go and participate in elections as observers, even though people will be cynical about it. But the truth is that there's a level at which, when you come in as an African, you actually do have an insight that others might not have. One thing that I think we forget about, that I wanted to refer to, is the importance of linking pneumonia to rheumatic fever. I think we've forgotten about that. We've forgotten that rheumatic fever there are simple home remedies for things like rheumatic fever. And we think that everything has to have a medicine. Whereas my mom, for example, had rheumatic fever as a child, but immediately it was identified by a doctor, and immediately she was given bed rest for 6 weeks. And as a result of that, she had a strong heart for the rest of her life. Whereas most people don't realize that if you get flu 2-3 times, your heart can be affected. And that is a major cause of death and disease in Africa. Nobody's talking about that. That's just something. And then another thing that I think microbial gel. But how does that contribute to antimicrobial resistance? I just want to have that tension that I would love to know something about that. And then the last thing is that I think there's a lot of scope for using cell phones for mapping. When there was, I don't know if you all know that, when Haiti had that terrible disaster, they used, there was a team that started doing mapping using WhatsApps and Facebook. And they eventually, the country was mapped in a way that had never been mapped before. And I just wonder why we in Africa are not using that, given our huge distances and what is possible. I've got a lot more.
All right, okay. So we'll
we'll pick up on some of those points. Any direct responses, reactions? Surely not everyone would say the children is arrogant.
No, they don't.
You don't seem very arrogant.
That's not what she said. I'm very careful what people say. I do not know people's plans. But yes, I think some of the work that international NGOs do is arrogant. Absolutely. I think a lot of it is vertically designed, in a place far away, not sufficiently cognizant of community realities, or only as an afterthought. That a lot of international development work doesn't really start with the community and what their needs are, what their priorities are, to kind of build something from the bottom up. And it's what we're trying to do differently. And I think we're all learning in that space, but we also have it's a tension that we have to navigate between ensuring that everything is local in response to local needs, but also the fact that we are a global organisation and we have global funding and that we have global principles that are enshrined in various documents that we strongly believe in, and that make it, I think, important for us to always have a global picture of what we do, and ensuring that if something works somewhere, it can maybe work somewhere else. But we need to test that assumption every single time using the proper mechanism. So it's, but I think to relate that to the public discourse and ensuring that people are bought into the concept of something that we bring is absolutely critical, and I completely agree. And I think a big difference between, and there's been no robust study about this, but I think anecdotal evidence does suggest that the big difference between the West Africa Ebola crisis, where 11,000 people died over the space of just a few months, whereas the outbreak in DRC, where it's around 2,000 people have died now in over a year, which is still horrible, in incredibly difficult conditions, conflict-ridden areas, multiple borders with Uganda, Rwanda, and others. But the severity and number of deaths is still on a completely different scale. The reason being that DRC and the Congolese have been dealing with small Ebola outbreaks for 40 years. They understand how it works, they understand the importance of it, they understand the importance of pulling together in those times. They understand how to identify the signs, communicate them immediately to the authorities, to their families, to their friends. So there is that kind of embedded psyche already, which has massively contributed to that being less dramatic, I suppose, than the one in West Africa, even though it's still terrible. So I think I agree.
I'd like to pick up on the role of the African Union. You whispered the word implementation, and I don't think anyone doubts the number of beautiful documents that the African Union is sitting on. If it implemented half of them, I suspect that this debate would be quite different, and that I would say also goes really to the heart of the conversation we're having. If governments acted on a lot of the plans they have, if institutions like the African Union followed through on a lot of these plans, we'd be in quite a different place.
Yeah, but I don't think it's an either or. I think yes, you can challenge the African Union for not implementing, but you can also challenge donors for not ignoring what exists. They could still engage with what exists, and I think that's the point. If you're doing such reproductive health, there's a policy. Even if the African Union is not using it, why go off and create something entirely different when that's there? Why not build on that?
Can I just make one more point? I know that others want to say something, but recently we had an amazing example. Cardiff University has a linkage with the University of Namibia and Zambia, and they recently developed a new form of research where they go in, they do a quick research. We had a hepatitis E outbreak, and they developed this form of research, being able to work with people. It was very quick, and within 2 months they had people on the ground addressing the issues and breaking the cycle. And that was because hepatitis E, they identified where's it coming from. And they immediately were able to work with the people who were carrying over the sickness. So it's just interesting. There are new forms of research and so on, working with people on the ground, happening. And I think it's exciting that people are becoming aware of those.
So I was sorry. No, not at all. No, I'm Nana Kofo, I'm with Salt Life Advisory. So I was, in my mind, seeing the point that Ade made and Dr. Andrew, your point just now about, and Larry about the great policies that are within the African Union that aren't implemented by national governments or consistently all taken on board by the donors sufficiently. And is that not rooted in the sort of advocacy and public education that Ade is pointing to? So if there are a number of constituencies that the specialists such as yourselves are engaged with, the direct policy maker, the electorate that are their paymasters, and then the local, and these are electorates in the donor countries, as well as locally, that you're having to convince, that you will have to convince consistently in order to be successful. You will have to, as a member as having no medical expertise whatsoever, or even scientifically, will have to be taught by you before I put a vote somewhere that is fact. And what I do see from our research at least is that something like the African Continental Free Trade Area, whereas I think I probably come from Pan-African roots, those are my values, my assumptions about the world. It feels like that makes sense. But when we speak to businesses around us locally, the reticence around this idea that, particularly in Nigeria where we have team members, is that we don't want fair or unfair competition coming in from our neighbouring countries. It really feels as if, unless we recognise that there is an advocacy thing, that our views about the greater good are going to require some campaigning. I think we may.
And if I may add, that advocacy has to be a living, continual conversation. It can't be a one-off. I mean, forgive me, AU is 54 member states. The EU has similar troubles. They say our member countries have to maintain this ratio of risk to debt to whatever. Greece, reneged on that. Italy reneged on that. Just because they have one, European Central Bank big tab, doesn't then mean that sacrosanct and all the member states follow that to the T. It's a living conversation. The Italian electorate or the Greek electorate came back and said, actually, no, we want to reject what the EU has said. And so similarly, yes, there's. I mean, I was in Cape Town. I haven't ended up there. I was in Cape Town for the World Economic Forum. The xenophobia against Nigerians there was real because of exactly what the citizens there are saying and their feelings about foreigners in their country. And so has the political leadership there had a dialogue with its citizens to understand where they are and sell something to them that's actually palatable and what they want, rather than recognising we're a world economic elite here and you have to meet us here. No, it's a conversation, it's a dialogue, which has to be ongoing in respect to where people are.
But then in that situation, does the government have to say, yeah, we don't like foreigners either?
No, not necessarily. It has to respect. First of all, it has to listen to its people. It can't just assume that it knows best and that it's going to ignore the feelings of people. So I'm not saying to ignore that or to take it as given that yes, we're xenophobic and that's the policy direction. It has to listen and bring people kind of together, make a compromise and make ways forward. But just to ignore or to do another extreme isn't going to lead to any civility.
And perhaps remind its people that people like me, when I was 6 years old, were directly my pocket money to buy a property in South Africa as a Nigerian primary school child. Do they remember that? Do they know that?
We're getting a bit sidetracked.
Sorry.
Very interesting topic. Easy to get sidetracked by it, but we have to stick to public health.
Well, it is linked because it's all about politics. That's what drives public health.
Everything anyway.
Certainly from a science perspective, I do agree that the lack of arrogance in terms of certainly like the science community, there's a lot of detail there, and when you've got populations where science is now part of the curriculum in most places, you're starting to get a basic science literacy, and so then making your diaspora who have had fancy training, or just the ones who have managed to come up from within, being able to communicate their science to a now more literate population, and maybe there's also a generational divide of parents who may not have benefited from that. Being able to say, actually, now this is where we are, we're designing drugs that are bespoke to the current context from within the countries, I think is a really important and a strong place to start a dialogue, saying that actually this isn't just coming from elsewhere, we're now generating it from within. But as you say, not being so arrogant as to think, look, I'm a scientist from here, so trust me. but being able to explain it and why it's relevant to communities, I think they're the best people placed to make those connections.
Just before Michael comes in, I just wanted to say that I absolutely agree, because I remember the point I was making about the kind of drug market policy thing. So taking our colleague's point about locally produced drugs and things, in the National Health Service here, you wouldn't, one hospital or trust or whatever doctor might come up with a new way of doing observations in pregnant women. That doesn't then become national policy just because one doctor has made a case for it and has done evidence-based results, whatever. There's a co-production across all the different trusts and a conversation that then says, this is the new way that we have to measure whatever observation you're doing. And so similarly, there hasn't been that similar journey with many public health institutions across the continent where there's, okay, this is the drug or the medical treatment or plan that is effective in this region. They've maybe ignored local effective non-clinical interventions and just said this has to be the medicine or the drug. So co-production and dialogue is kind of the point I'm trying to make. Sorry, Michael.
Adi, I was just going to challenge your statement that we have Spain and Africa, because I don't think it's Spain at all. I think if you look at this sort of different domains of health, there's progress almost everywhere. If you look at a lot of the outcomes in terms of health, quantitative outcomes, whether it's maternal mortality, vaccine coverage, access to healthcare, they're all going up, and they've gone up, at an incredible rate, albeit starting from a low base. Tanzania last year had the highest vaccine coverage in the world. Question the data a little bit, but actually data is becoming more transparent as well. This is something we see in data sharing exercises. There's also in terms of the governance structure, you see Nigerian CDC now is thanks to in great part to Chick-fil-A, is an institute that is recognised in Africa and outside of Africa as a reputable, credible public health institute. You've got the Africa CDC for the first time that's still at infancy, but actually is a partner that is spoken to and speaks to and influences at the global level. Even in the research in the academic field, you see things that are no longer acceptable. Doing parachute research is no longer acceptable. Taking data from countries and publishing without any authorship from the countries is no longer acceptable. So I think that if you put all this together and you look at the proportion, we're still very far from some of the absolute targets in terms of disease indicators, etc. But the progress is tremendous at all, both clinical, public health, governance, research, at all levels. So I think it's important to celebrate that. Is there still a long way to go? Yeah, absolutely. But I think the trajectory is very positive.
Just for the video recording, I didn't say public health in Africa is failing.
I said vaccines are failing specifically. It didn't say public health as a whole.
On the drug production, it's quite interesting to see that it's useful to look at the European history. I work in vaccines, but every single national state-owned vaccine production unit in Europe is closed now. The last one being Denmark and Netherlands have both been closed. Interestingly, the Dutch one's been bought by a Canadian multinational company that produces generics. So that's something to keep in mind.
What should we like for that? What does that say?
Well, I think the idea that you have to do everything, that's developing local solutions for local problems is useful to some extent, but there are global market forces, and trying to there's big issues, there's scale issues with, particularly with the pharmaceutical industries, particularly in vaccines, that essentially make these companies, for better or for worse, you have to engage them. And I think there are levers to force them to provide products at a price that is reasonable. But I think going the route of we'll just make it ourselves is a dangerous one, and generally ineffective one as well from the economic perspective.
I think vaccines is a really interesting topic from the Cookstoves perspective. So everyone knows that Cookstoves, all the major white socks and sandals institutes go in and say you should try this new non-smoke cook stove. And one of the things that I would hope to see from a African-led research is that so many vaccines need the cold chain to be effective. And I think I agree that maybe you have to leave it to market forces and everything, but I would hope the African voice in this is actually a cold chain is not something we have, and we have the opportunity here to, or we don't always have, we have the opportunity to do technology leapfrogging and saying, actually, what if we set the bar higher and say we're trying to develop a vaccine that doesn't require a cold chain? And then you have the opportunity to say, this is the circumstances we're operating in. And actually, if no vaccines need, or more and more didn't need a cold chain, then that's something the whole world would benefit from. And you can see the opportunity there where an African perspective on, well, that's a ridiculous way to solve that problem, could actually then have a sort of a global market impact, because you could solve a problem.
I'm certainly not suggesting that there shouldn't be. I mean, interestingly, a lot of these companies are now opening tech hubs, you know, in Kenya, in Ghana, and other countries. But I think no country on its own, whether it's in Africa, in Europe, or anywhere, can sort of go alone in that field. I mean, the amount of money that's required to develop. I mean, I can only speak about vaccines, and I have no shares in any. I just tremendous, and you know, I think we have I think it's 10% of products that are developed that actually make it to the market. So you have to have the financial resilience to be able to absorb those R&D costs. But I think I think at least the way I see things going forward is these sort of global interconnected. Sort of hubs that work together to develop new solutions, and I think the market is aware of that, and that's what's happening, and that's probably where different parts of the world can contribute.
And just to hugely qualify, which I'm sure you weren't doing anyway, but hugely qualify the fact that market forces have driven higher vaccination rates in Africa. When we know that the vast majority of countries in Africa, including Tanzania that you mentioned, access vaccines at Gavi prices, which are not market prices, precisely. So the reason why they've been able to massively expand their coverage is precisely because an institution was designed to shape the market or to tackle the market failures in that respect.
So when I say market force, and to be very clear, there are very, very few countries.
And we are partnering with GSK, so I don't have shares, but I do.
I work on the national program here. We don't pay market prices either. We have. It needs to be a heavily regulated industry, but I think it. You know, you talking about the private sector. I think understanding the private sector, understanding the tensions there, and working together with the private sector in a regulated and controlled environment is probably the most realistic way to go forward. And I mean, and Gavi is part of the landscape. I'm not suggesting for a second that it should be entirely left to market forces, because that would be a disaster.
Sorry, my question wasn't answered about I would basically put it in my solutions to wash without water, solutions to spreading germs without water, because you need soap and water to wash hands so that you don't, or you need that antimicrobial gel. But what about resistance?
Anyone?
My understanding of like hand sanitizer gel is it basically makes a unsustainable environment for the bacteria to continue, whereas things like antibiotics chemically interact with the bacteria. So it would obviously be massively concerning if hand sanitizing gel, if bacteria starts becoming resistant.
Until recently I worked with IBM, as many of you know, and they are an organisation that actually have a research institute on the continent with labs in both South Africa and Kenya. And I think they're looking at two things. One is the role of data in better understanding, and therefore being able to better predict both how disease will spread and what the consequences will be of different kinds of approaches. That's really important. But critically, they bring together not just data scientists, but pure scientists with specialism in the pure sciences as well. So they're really looking at, from a healthcare perspective, how do you get that intersection of data with the pure sciences to drive solutions that are relevant on the continent. And so the data they're looking at are continental data. Obviously, there's an opportunity to overlay with data from elsewhere, but that kind of driving things from the base of the different countries and population themselves, I think, are really important. So they obviously they employ scientists, researchers, and I think that's so important to have grow the research community on the continent because for obvious reasons people have have their local context in their heart, and they bring a lot of knowledge. So whether it's returning diaspora or whether it's building the scientific communities in country, I think both are really, really important to support and to grow. So I know, I hope they're listening in on the transmission, but they're very interested, have been very interested in this group and making connections with this group.
Yes, I'm not sure whether it's a question, a comment, perhaps. I find it very interesting that several of the speakers addressed sort of maybe developments in global politics. Several people talked about the rise of nationalism, the rise of populism, a certain maybe tendency towards unilateralism within the global system, and how that might impact global institutions, global the global response to health problems in different countries. And on the one hand, I sense that a lot of people were seeing that there's a threat in terms of what people were saying, the impact on aid, maybe aid becoming less, funding to the WHO. Becoming less as well, and then from you, Ada, you were in your attempt to be provocative, which I welcome very much. You were sort of maybe alluding that this could be perhaps an opportunity, maybe to revisit, review certain assumptions in terms of how some of these global institutions operate, and just question the system that we have. And I'm just wondering in the work of some of your organizations, how do you on a practical level perceive these new developments? When people talk about nationalism, unilateralism, how is it impacting your work? When you deal with donors and governments, and while nobody has a crystal ball, but what will global health look like in 5 years if this trend of political nationalism and populism continues? What can we expect? How do organizations such as yourself, how do you prepare for that? How do you plan? Can you plan? Do you integrate that also in your risk analyses and how you set yourself? I
I
find that
suspect
really interesting.
we've only seen the very beginnings of this wave of nationalism, and it's going to get a lot worse. We have about 60 seconds to respond to that very simple, very small question right there.
Who wants to have a go at it? I think certainly from our perspective, yes, we do. We recognize it as a risk. We're looking at diversifying our funding streams beyond governmental streams. We're also looking to, with universal health care in Nigeria, the passage of the Health Act means that there's a basic healthcare provision fund which should theoretically unlock more funding for the health sector from within the country. But so yeah.
I mean, just very, very briefly, we always work with governments, and we work through Ministries of Health, we work through their structures. We try to understand the political economy of an issue in the country as much as we possibly can before engaging on, for example, pneumonia in Nigeria, which is something I'm working on at the moment. And I guess what we're seeing is that regardless of the rise of populism, governments, and if you go to the Ministry of Health, whether it's the Minister himself or his higher civil servants underneath him, or the NPHCDA in Nigeria, they are responsive to good evidence. They are responsive to good evidence. You give them good evidence. You help them solve a problem for their people. You will make an ally of them. They don't necessarily hold the purse, because then you have to speak with the Ministry of Finance, and they hold the purse, and you have a whole range of other stakeholders to engage to solve the problem. But people are generally responsive to good evidence and want to do the right thing for their people. And I think that's got to be the assumption that you adopt when you work in the country, when you work with the Ministry of Health, when you work with the district health officer. Always start from that assumption. And usually, this assumption is usually verified in our experience, I would say.
Yeah, and nationalists ultimately want to be popular.
Exactly. Exactly.
So they're not necessarily going to tell you to go away, right? If you can aid that. We have to wrap it up there, unfortunately. Not much to say, really. Thank you very much to all the speakers. Thank you very much to all of you for the engaging discussion. The next event is on the 10th of October, which is on mental health, I believe.
Mental health and NCDs. So if anyone hasn't signed up for that yet, there's a couple of places left, so feel free to do that. And then we'll wrap up the series on the 22nd of October, which is when we'll be zoning in finance. Encouraging you to come up a lot today, so we're going to be talking money yesterday. Yeah.
And who's going to pay for it all, right?
Exactly. It's not very much talking about African so you've got to back your
African taxpayers should pay a bit more.
That's going to be a tough sell, that one. Anyway, that is for the 22nd of October. For today, thank you very much to everyone. Thanks again, Nick, for putting it all together.
Thank you.